On Darwin's The Descent of Man, I was assigned Chapter 5 on the development of the intellectual and moral faculties during the primeval and civilized times. The chapter focuses on how and why the process of natural selection affects man differently from how it affects the lower animals. Darwin posits that man is unable to experience natural selection on the same degree as the lower animals, largely due to our empathy and socially centric morality. He attributes this divergence to the process by which natural selection first ushered man, in its primeval era, towards the most social methodology for survival. As a result of this, those who learned to work together outscaled other clans and tribes of the era, allowing for further reproduction and conquest. In the modern day, man is unable to undergo a thorough process of natural selection due to many factors, chief of which is our moral obligation to protect our fellow man, regardless of this man's value to the human race on an evolutionary level. As a brief excerpt, Darwin stated that as the reasoning powers and foresight of the members became improved, each man would soon learn that if he aided his fellow men, he would commonly receive aid in return. From this low motive, he might acquire the habit of aiding his fellows, and the habit of performing benevolent actions certainly strengthens the feelings of sympathy, which gives the first impulse of benevolent actions. For me, what I liked most about this chapter was that Darwin exhaustively examined the effects of sympathy and community, government, and economics, and how all these things affected natural selection in the modern era. Pulling from many sources and many real-world examples, Darwin makes sure to put to rest any true doubt that natural selection is stifled in modern man. What surprised me most was that there's an entire subsection towards the end of the chapter dedicated to the dispelling of the idea that man was born civilized and that those barbarians in the modern day were regressed from God's original intention for man. And instead, of course, he proposed the more modern idea that we accept today that men evolved forwards and that those that he considered barbarous at the time were not quite as far advanced. And maybe it comes from more racist ideals at the time, but nonetheless a more sound argument than was made prior. The more curious thing that I found was that Darwin seemed to suggest throughout the chapter that man had stagnated in its evolution because we resist natural selection on a conscious level, and in fact have even moved against it, favoring the more rich and their inheritors. For my image, I chose one of the more comedic takes on the evolution of man, but I chose this one specifically because it shows our move towards intellect and a more social lifestyle with things like news media and connections through cell phones and working at home. And overall, Chapter 5 was a very interesting examination into how man has advanced towards a more social group and how that has affected our process of natural selection.